Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Selena Zhang. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives here at the Future Skills Center. And I'm so excited to welcome you all here today for this conversation about mapping the experiences of racialized folks in the real estate sector. We've got an amazing panel of practitioners and leaders today who are going to be talking about these issues, and you're going to hear from Zara Ibrahim and Kofi Hope, the leads of this research, two of the brightest stars I know in city building who I've loved working with in so many iterations over the years. So a couple of things before we begin. This session is being offered in English and in French. And we also have closed captioning that you can enable. So if you want to go to the bottom of your screen, you can toggle between the languages and enable and disable the captioning at your leisure. This session is also being recorded. So if you like what you hear, feel free to come back onto the FSC channels in a few days. You can share snippets of the conversation and the video with your peers and colleagues who weren't able to join us. I am calling in today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. The treaties that cover these territories include the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and the Upper Canada Treaties. And I know I'm calling in from Toronto and the GTA. Some of you are here as well in the same region, but I know there are going to be other folks from across the province and across the country. So feel free to hop into the chat and say hello. Tell us where you're calling in from. If you know whose land you're on, feel free to make your own land acknowledgement. And as we reflect together on the importance of land acknowledgements and on the history of land and place and on the consequence of historic and continued and institutionalized and systemic injustices and inequities against Indigenous peoples in Canada. You know, this is a critical part of the work that we all do, those of us that are non-Indigenous on this call and in Canada. And for me, as a first-generation Canadian, as the most recent generation of settlers to Canada, it's something I try to incorporate into my practice, thinking about reconciliation as a daily practice. And that's so aligned with the themes of what we're talking about today. Here at FSC, we talk about skills. We talk about how to get people the skills they need. We talk about how to help people to reskill and upskill as their careers change and are disrupted, how to support practitioners and workforce development organizations and policymakers to better support workers and employers as they go through ongoing labor market changes. FSC launched about 4 years ago. Our 4-year birthday is coming up next week. And over the last 4 years, we've been building a future-focused skills innovation hub. And in addition to bringing research like this to the fore, we also aim to build a network and a community of practice so that we can share and learn from each other. We also invest in innovation pilots and skills development. We've got over 240 of them at this point, with the goal of sourcing innovation from the ground up and touching every region, every sector, every population from coast to coast to coast. And the themes of what we're talking about today around equity and systemic and historic barriers and sector-specific conversations today about real estate and development, this is really the backdrop of everything we do. Real estate is something that, you know, at the surface feels like it should kind of be neutral, you know, concrete and the brick around us. But when you start to think about who owns it, who shapes it, who gets to build it, who gets to move it, who gets to make decisions around it, real estate in the physical form of our cities is so far from being neutral. And what this report is so illuminating around are these questions that aren't a surprise to so many of us. What does it mean when the people who make decisions around and create places for people to live and work and play don't reflect the diversity of our communities? How do we make sense of these challenges and barriers that are standing in the way of racialized professionals in the sector so that we can better connect with each other about the steps we need to take to move the needle, to take action together? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Big questions focused on action. I hope you'll stay tuned, because at the end of this event, there's also going to be a very special announcement about next steps, action-related next steps. So we've got a tight agenda, and I am going to pass it on to my friend Kofi Hope, CEO and co-founder of Monumental, who's first going to share some findings and insights from the report.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Selena mentioned, my name is Kofi Hope, and I'm going to give us a very quick kind of Coles Notes review of the research report, and I hope it whets your appetite to download it and learn more. Okay, can we go to the first slide? So what were our core research questions? Well, in short, we came to this work wondering, okay, what are the explicit barriers that are faced by racialized individuals to advancement in the real estate development industry? And then to think about, when we know those barriers, what are the skills, knowledge, and abilities needed to help them overcome those barriers and kind of thrive? And we took a focus that really looked around entrepreneurial pathways as we started shaping some of the specific recommendations and the policy response or programmatic response we'll talk to in a little bit later. But as context, so real estate development, for one thing, it's a critically important industry. We all know we're in a housing crisis, and much of the responses and the work to change that crisis will come from this industry. But it's also a key pillar of the Canadian economy, right? Residential construction makes up about 10% of our GDP annually. There was around $40 billion invested in commercial and industrial developments in the late 2000s each year. And there's over 300,000 people who are working in this industry. So we have a vital part of our economy, a place where solutions to the housing crisis lie. And then we have racialized populations who are making up a larger part of the workforce. And so ensuring folks are in this industry, thriving in this industry, helping create the solutions we need, that's actually something of national significance. And so you can see our research questions there. We really want to understand what's the state of representation, what are the barriers, what are the opportunities for racialized folks to get in with an entrepreneurial lens, and then talk about the skills. We can go to the next slide. So here's some of our learnings. So state of representation itself, like many industries in Canada, what was clear as we looked at both the quantitative data and the qualitative data is that there are racialized folks in real estate development, but it's much more proportionate that we see them at junior levels. We see a real lack of representation as you move up in more senior positions, to the point that one statistic we found was that it's estimated that only 14% of positions in ownership, partner, and C-level positions in this industry are held by folks who are visible minorities today. The Crew Network, which is commercial real estate women, they did a study that looked at the UK, Canada, and the US, and they surveyed people across the industry and found only 16% of the folks they spoke to thought that they had workplaces with strong levels of diversity. And even that bar for strong levels was saying at least 25% of my colleagues are racialized. So the vast majority of folks they surveyed said, we don't live in, or we don't work in workplaces with high levels of diversity. And that goes across the building industries. We know that in the building trades, where there's such a need for people and the folks who actually deliver on the work that gets planned in this industry, only 7% of apprentices right now in Canada are racialized folks. So we know there's a lack of presence and a lack of leadership. At the same time, there are DEI programs that are happening kind of all across the industry, as in different places. But again, when we spoke to people and when we looked at some of the quantitative data, the Urban Land Institute, they polled their members in a recent survey, and they found only 26% of respondents agreed that there is a good understanding in their industry of how city building has contributed to systemic racism in North America, which shows, even though the initiatives are happening, really understanding that and connecting it to people's work is an area that needs further investment in time. And then there isn't extensive race-based data. There's a lot more research that needs to happen here. But what was clear from the interviews was ongoing topics around cultural differences and a feeling of exclusion and bias for folks in this space. So let's go to the common barriers. And these we really pulled from the interviews we did. We also did focus groups. We did a survey of industry professionals, and we did some roundtables to help us understand from BIPOC folks and racialized folks in the industry what their experience was like. And here we heard a few things, and these are, again, not to call out real estate development in particular. These are things that we see across corporate Canada and across industries in Canada. One of them is recruitment and hiring. Right? Our interviewees spoke about this self-fulfilling prophecy that happens when you have folks who look a certain way, a monoculture in industry, and then they continue to hire people who look like them and promote and move up people who look like them. And that was something that came up across the interviews, people talking about racialized folks stuck in entry-level positions, having trouble connecting socially with colleagues, of there being a very kind of white male-centric culture traditionally in this industry. Folks weren't able to make those connections. They weren't able to find the mentors or the sponsors, and they were having to work twice as hard and wait twice as long to move up in their roles. And when we talked to people about the building trades, people spoke about even more explicit discrimination that was part of that industry, and the reality that you just kind of had to put your head down and muddle through it and just accept that as a fact of life, at least for people who'd been working in the last few decades there. We can go on to the next one. So we had some quantitative data. It showed a lack of representation. Our interviews, we had deep stories of people talking about barriers and bias. And then we decided to think about, okay, well, where are the opportunities though? How do we get people into this industry? And specifically across the board, many of the folks we interviewed talked about being burnt out, having left the industry, but saying we still want to be connected. And across the board, people were saying we're interested in entrepreneurship. We're interested in actually, leading development projects and having a role where we can kind of lead that change we want to see. And so we thought, well, where are the market opportunities? Like, where are the roles for people? And there's two sides to this coin when we look at it. One is the housing crisis in Canada disproportionately affects racialized folks. We see that when it's about inappropriate housing, that's across the board, that's particularly pronounced for racialized newcomers. And then when we look at home ownership, it differs from communities. Black Canadians in particular have clear barriers over home ownership. And also there's lots of evidence of there being discrimination around kind of rentals in the space. So we know that the crisis is really hitting racialized Canadians hard. On the other hand, when you're thinking about people getting into this industry, the reality is to do development projects takes deep, deep pockets. So much of that industry is about assembling your capital stack, getting the money together that's required so that you can actually activate a project. And when we know we're talking about communities that don't historically have that significant wealth there is a barrier, right? Most of the development companies we see, for example, in Toronto, are family businesses, and people are using family wealth in order to step into the space. So when we recognized that and looked at the landscape, we saw, well, there's one place, though, where there is an opening, and that's what they call the missing middle or infill developments. These are smaller scale developments of, say, 1 to 5 units, many times happening in existing neighborhoods, which folks have said are critical to kind of creating the housing we need for all the people coming to Canada that need homes. And this is also an area where government is moving through lowering development fees, through making things simpler around bylaws to try to incentivize people to do more missing middle housing. And so we really saw that as a place that both the barriers for entry as far as capital were lower, and also there were policy openings that could be a great place for more racialized entrepreneurs to step into this space. So then we can move to the next slide. What are the skills? What are the supports people need? So number one that came up, people talked about social capital and connections. And we know these are critical to any kind of career or entrepreneurial success. And racialized folks spoke about, not being able to find mentors in the space, not having sponsors, being people within organizations who say, hey, you're tapped for success. We're going to invest in you. People talked about being overlooked and that not happening. But also, and I remember when we did our focus group in Toronto, and we brought together BIPOC professionals in the space, the energy in that room, because people said, it's just so great to be here with people that look like me who are passionate about real estate development. So it's not just that social capital of connecting, in a bridging sense to people from other communities. There's a need for professionals in the space to bond. I know we have speakers today who've done great work about creating those places for racialized folks in the industry to bond. That was social capital. Now, financial capital was also key, and it's not just access to the money. That's a big one. And understanding, how do we work through the lending system? How do we estimate our costs? How do we get our pro formas or our business cases together for banks, right? But it was also this fact that, there is some systemic discrimination. There's a lack of knowledge. And so many people who had worked in the space talked about having to go to alternative lending, and that carrying its own consequences. Someone we spoke to in a focus group, they knew how to put two properties together, build missing middle. They were doing it. They simply had no luck at the banks. They were going to alternative lenders. And they talked about when they stepped away from the field was one day they were 5 minutes late making a payment to one of these lenders, and they ended up with a $30,000 fee. And at that, they said, it's just not worth it. I just can't get anywhere with the banks, the alternative lenders. It's just too difficult. I'm just going to step away from working in this field. So understanding and helping people navigate to get capital is critical. And the last is, development is a complex process. There's lots of different professional skills that are involved. There's different stages. And people talked about needing help to understand the full process, to understand the regulations, the building standards. How do you scope an appropriate site? How do you know which professionals to bring in at which time? Where do you really want to spend money? Where can you have savings when it comes to, your architects, your builders, all the different people that you work with? And so folks said these are like those trade secrets that we just don't see in a course, we just can't read a book about. And even people who work for development companies, I remember one of the people in the interview said, that's when we were asked to leave the room, when people were really, those trade secrets, deals were closed, people were mapping out how they were getting their capital together. That's what we missed those connections to. And we need a place where someone can take the full process and break it down for us. And so, and I know we'll talk about this a little later, but to say, we've taken these insights and really then, we can move to the next slide, really then thought about what is a programmatic response. And that is the incubator we're launching in April, Future Builds. I know we'll talk about that at the end, but just to say it's going to be at the University of Toronto, and it's going to respond directly to these skills needed, giving people that overview of real estate development, giving them mentors, giving them social capital, giving them hands-on experience, and a community of folks they can work with. And that's coming live next week. We're so excited to bring that together. That's where we're kind of taking the research and putting it into reality. But to say we're, of course, Monumental and the Infrastructure Institute are just some of the players in the scene. And we know that there have been racialized individuals really at the front line in this space, doing interventions to make the industry more inclusive, to create mentorship pathways, to shift culture. And we are so excited to have some of those folks here today to talk about what they've experienced and how they're working to change the industry. And so on that note, I'm going to turn it over to our co-founder and co-lead of Monumental, Zara Ibrahim, who's going to introduce our panel to us.
Awesome. Thanks, Kof, and thanks for that hyper speed, amazing presentation of our research. We're gonna go deeper into it over the course of this conversation. And like Kofi said, one of the things that we learned along the way is that progress is being made, and the people that are here today are stewards of that process, of that progress. We have amazing racialized folks who are changing the industry from a variety of different positions within and sort of at the edge, and bringing in critical supports that are going to move the development industry forward. So we're so excited for today's conversation. So all of the speakers' bios will be in the chat. I am going to read them just so you know how amazing these people are. I would invite all of you, though, who are here with us today. I see a whole bunch of people here. I know you've started to introduce yourself. It would be so nice to hear your why. What appealed to you about this conversation today? What drew you? What curiosities are you exploring in and around the real estate development space? So if you can just pepper the chat with that. I think that would really give us some context, and we can continue to sort of engage with your questions and your curiosity. So we're very happy to have Salim Arabji here, who's the president and CEO of the York University Development Corporation. Salim Arabji is an accomplished city builder with a passion for purpose-driven solutions. As the former senior vice president of development for Creatio, which is the City of Toronto's real estate agency, she led the development team managing a pipeline of over 200 sites, in addition to key portfolios such as the City of Toronto's Housing Now initiative, which leverages city-owned lands to build affordable housing, mixed-use, and mixed-income communities. Lima's commitment to city building extends beyond her professional role. Throughout her career, she has served on several nonprofit boards committed to inclusive and resilient cities. Currently, she is a member of the ULI Toronto Advisory Board, the R Labs Industry Issue and Transformation Council, and serves on the board of directors for the YMCA GTA, as well as for the Toronto Foundation, where she chairs the Social Impact Investment Committee. Salima holds an MBA from the Rotman School of Business at the University of Toronto and is valedictorian, holy smokes, of her undergraduate class at the Sauder School of Business at the University of British Columbia. Yeah, that's like, snaps for that. Snaps for all these bios. There's going to be a million things in all of them. They're so impressive and amazing. We also have Eli Bawa, who is a senior public consultation coordinator at the City of Toronto Parks, Forestry and Recreation Division, and also today is here as in his capacity as the co-founder of MyPOC, mentors for Indigenous and planners of color, which we're excited to hear more about. Eli is a practicing urban planner and public consultant with multidisciplinary experience gained by working in a spectrum of city and community building roles. He has worked on development applications, master plans, social plans, mobility and transportation projects across Ontario. Eli has co-developed equity initiatives centering the lived experience and voices of Toronto's diverse urban stakeholders while fostering collaborative environments that generate values of reciprocity and sustainability. To Eli, leadership is about allowing yourself to be vulnerable while advocating for what you believe in that may benefit someone other than yourself. This is why he co-founded the Mentoring Initiative for Indigenous and Planners of Color. You'll hear us say MyPOC a lot today. With the goal to advance diversity and representation among city builders and leadership, the Mentoring Initiative for Indigenous and Planners of Color focuses on establishing a national network between experienced planners and emerging planners from marginalized communities. As a former committee member of the City of Toronto's 2S LGBTQ+ Council Advisory Body, he advised and helped to inform strategies aimed at removing barriers faced by the queer community. And Rosemary Powell, the Executive Director of the Toronto Community Benefits Network. Also, you're going to hear TCBN, so get used to that acronym. We're going to be saying it a lot as well today. Rosemary is a passionate advocate for social, economic, and environmental justice. She has led for over 20 years from the grassroots up, managing and developing several innovative and impactful community programs and services to support historically disadvantaged communities and equity-seeking groups' access to the labor market and the economy. Her community engagement work in Jane and Finch earned several awards for leadership and imagination. Currently, Rosemary is the executive director of TCBN, which is a community labor coalition of 120 member organizations and groups, which successfully initiated community benefits agreements for the Eglinton Crosstown, the Finch West LRT transit projects, West Park Healthcare Center, and Rexdale Casino Woodbine. So I don't know if folks feel like throwing some love up in the chat, but just say hello and give some energy to our amazing speakers. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you do to move this industry and our city building world forward. So your bios are amazing and incredibly rich, but we wanted to start this conversation by just grounding each of you in sort of how you relate to the real estate development industry. So what we thought we would do is just take a few minutes and have each of you just let us know a little bit more about how the work that you do is oriented around or in the development industry, and specifically sort of the work, what you're trying to change. And so Salima, do you mind if I go to you first?
Happy to go first. So I've worked in the real estate space for over 15 years. I am comfortable being identified as a real estate developer, but I identify myself as a city builder. In my time in the industry, I have worked for private family business. I've worked for publicly traded real estate companies in the form of REITs. I've worked in the public sector at municipal land corporations as their real estate development organization. And now, of course, I'm at an academic institution leading the real estate development organization for that academic institution. What I'm trying to change in the space is leave every community better than we found it. And that's just a principal ethos in the approach that I take as a real estate developer, as a city builder.
Awesome. Eli, maybe we'll come to you next. We'll go in order of the bios.
Yeah. I guess so far, my experience in the development sector is mainly working with developers at my previous role, working with them on different condo developments or neighborhood developments. And then in my current role, working with them on a lot of our parks projects. I guess sort of my passion interest, I guess, when it comes to this sector is sort of where my POC comes into play. So sort of creating more of a presence, not just for racialized planners, but especially for like emerging racialized planners and aspiring racialized planners. So that is planners who recently completed their masters or those who are still in school as well. So just getting us the connections that we need to sort of help support our growth within this sector and making it a bit more easier as best as possible.
Great. And Eli, we'll speak a little bit more about that over the course of our conversation, because as Kofi mentioned earlier, access to the networks and the social capital was something that many of our research participants, and through sort of our desk research, we learned that's a massive part of advancing careers and efforts in real estate development. So excited to hear more about that. Rosemary.
Okay, it's great to be here. Je suis enchantée d'être ici parmi vous tous aujourd'hui. So I would say I identify mainly as a community organizer. There's a saying that we used to have growing up. It's if you see something and you don't like it, bite it and put it the way you want it. And so I've always been kind of a troublemaker, not accepting the system as it is, and, figuring out ways for how to kind of navigate systems and make it work for people who have been kind of left out of the system. And I think I take a lot off of my mom, because she, as a single mother, raised us in Montreal in a very poor neighborhood and community, and she wouldn't allow that to continue. She actually organized her own community organization, and all of us as children, we got to participate and contribute to our own communities. So as I said, not a real estate person, but so my foray into this development world.
Oh,
so there's just a little bit of a somebody's
interpretation, or someone speaking behind you.
Not me. No. Okay, no worries. But I don't hear it anymore, so that's good. Yeah, so my foray into this development world, really, I think it was back in 2008 when I worked for the Jane and Finch Community and Family Center as the assistant executive director. It's a multi-service organization for the local community, operating out of Toronto community housing buildings, working with residents who are experiencing different kind of socioeconomic challenges. And a pivotal point happened when outside of my window, a young man was shot and killed. Just outside of my workplace, and it really devastated the community. And the community mobilized, as we always do. And a lot of the questions were, what's happening? Why are these shootings continuing to happen? Why don't our young people have opportunities in the society? Why is Toronto leaving us out? And so just based on those conversations that were happening, and at the time, just a number of environmental issues and considerations were happening at the time. I recall the garbage strike I recall smart metering happening. There was the announcement of Transit City and the Finch West LRT and the Shepherd LRT as well. And people were both concerned, they were excited at the same time, but they were also looking at it from outside and saying, how can we benefit from this massive investment that was coming into our neighborhoods? And people were actually scared too of gentrification. And just the fact that there was no intentional planning and thinking around about how people can actually benefit from the jobs and the economic opportunities that were about to come. And we know when development happens that, especially in transit, you build it and they will come, meaning more development will happen. Lots of condo developments being proposed. And so there was a lot of concern, but at the same time, lots of excitement. And that's where I kind of entered into that conversation and that space with labor and community about the concept of community benefits agreements, which I'm going to be happy to talk more about later on in the conversation.
Thanks, Rosemary. And you said so. You like sort of laid down a bunch of threads for us to pick up and weave together over the course of this conversation. The first one, I was just struck by even just this idea, right, that people who are trying to speak into the barriers and challenges, we call ourselves troublemakers. We self-identify as, this is trouble, but it's actually a real need, right? So your work is needed as evidenced by everything you just said. The other thing, and I think this transitions us really nicely to our first question, which is, Rosemary, you spoke about opportunity, right? And this idea that real estate development, we know, and Kofi laid it out in the presentation, it's such a huge part of our economy. And we know that it impacts what civic life actually looks like, what life in cities looks like. But the other piece of it, and you said it really well, is that, some people are looking at it and going, well, someone's creating a lot of wealth for their families, for the people that they want to see thrive in the world through this process. A huge part of what we learned when we were talking to folks one-on-one and in our focus groups was that folks see real estate development as an opportunity to create intergenerational wealth after having been barriered from many other ways of creating intergenerational wealth. So there's so many layers to what we call opportunity in this space. And so, I would say that the challenges to speak into the opportunity of getting more diverse folks into real estate development are many. Kofi outlined sort of the top lines of 3. We see recruitment and hiring, getting into these organizations, being literate enough to get those jobs and stay in those jobs, retention and promotion within those organizations once you're in, bias and cultural differences in the way that the organizations are run, in the way they think about building in community. So those are just some of the challenges that speak to us, the barriers to us stepping into some of those opportunities. And I'm just wondering for each of you, how does your work respond directly to some of these challenges? And Salim, I kind of want to go to you first, just because, you're right in the center of it.
Sure.
And maybe we'll start with you.
So I think the idea of opportunity is sort of the foundational component of any real estate activity. If I can digress just for a moment, the idea of real estate development is all about value creation. And so I think the thing that we're saying is we're taking a piece of property that produces X and translating it to producing Y, whether it's a single family home that we're moving into mid-rise and sort of the opportunity that you've identified, or it's a parking lot that's being redeveloped into some greater, more dense form of development. And so then how do we take that opportunity and equitably divide it between the players in the space? And I think when you're working for a private company, it looks a lot different than when you're maybe in municipal development court, but I had the unbelievable pleasure to play in that court for over a decade, or even now in my role in an academic institution, it looks different because ultimately you're serving the risk holder. Who is the person that is taking on that capital stack? Who's putting their money at risk? Where does that go, and what do they expect from that? And so maybe to come at the question a little bit more directly, for me, it's about how do we define value? And so is it just in a financial sense, or can we start to actually build other ways that we think about opportunity and we think about value creation so that we can divert financial dollars into other places that have larger dividends that just may not be there when you look at a pro forma. And that is a huge education process. It's an education process for all of the actors kind of revolving around the space, but it's also about understanding their time horizon. And so taking the concept of time and money, which are so fundamental in real estate, and kind of flipping them on their head to say, it's not necessarily just about now, it's about in the fullness of time and what does this asset become? And I am a fundamental believer that doing right by community actually makes the project more sustainable in the long run, which should lead to greater financial value in the long run too. And so the idea of trade-offs too, I think is really big. Education, redefining value.
Eli or Rosemary, like, do either of you want to sort of jump in next?
You wanna? Oh, I can go. Okay. Yeah, no, I guess where my POC sort of tackles some of the issues you mentioned would mainly come in sort of the sort of like an educational component, but also what we've learned over time is that it sort of tackles that issue, not fully, but it sort of gets at the issue of retention of racialized folks when it comes to the workplaces. And I can touch on that a bit at first. Is for a lot of racialized folks, when they enter these workplaces, oftentimes they may be the only racialized person there or one of a few. So a lot of times when it comes to issues that you experience in the workplace that may be more specific to sort of your lived experience as a racialized person or other things tied to your identity, it may be hard to open up about that stuff to sort of your supervisors, managers, or partners who may not share the same lived experience as you. So oftentimes a lot of racialized folks compartmentalize those issues and they feel that they don't want to really share it, or they share it with other racialized folks in the same workplace, and it's sort of like it becomes sort of what I like to call it sort of like your safety circle in your workplace. Like, who are those individuals or key individuals that you go to speak about issues? But then the issue is like, what if you don't have any of that in your workplace? So what we found, MyPOC became sort of that safety circle for a lot of folks, especially junior planners or people who just entered into development as well. MyPOC became that safety circle for folks to sort of share the struggles they've been experiencing in their industry or in the industry when they didn't really have folks in their workplace to share those struggles with. And we've had like sort of folks tell us that they would have left their workplaces if they didn't have MyPOC to provide them that safety circle, of folks that they can go to just to vent, essentially. We have folks in MyPOC as well, which is great, like our mentors who've been in the industry for a lot longer, decades and decades. And, they found even with those mentors that they felt safe just explaining what they're going through with them, especially a lot of our racialized mentors, because everyone's there for the same sort of similar reasons and everyone understands sort of what's going on, especially if you're involved in MyPOC. So we found that MyPOC was really great, just helping sort of tackle that retention issue a little bit, not fully, but it really does help in a sort of a bigger way. I forgot the other point that I wanted to touch on, so maybe I'll come back to me and we'll go to Rosemary.
Jump in, like Rose. Maybe we'll go to
Sure.
Rosemary, and then we can come back to you, and it'll surface again.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So for me, I'm a firm believer, like Majora Carter says, nobody should have to leave their neighborhood to live in a better one. And here in Toronto, there's just a lot happening in terms of, like we're literally 10 years behind New York. There's a lot of prosperity that's happening. It's just that it's being shared unequally. And so this is why community benefits really resonated with me back then and still does as a really great process to allow people who have been excluded from the planning and decision-making process to be able to intervene in the planning process in a really complex process that they may not fully understand, in a complex process that doesn't usually include them. And so through community benefits agreements, what we're doing as a community labor coalition coming together is really to identify a process that can be used consistently to make sure that your voice is being heard. At the city and, especially when we're thinking about the use of taxpayer dollars on, these infrastructure projects and just the the benefits that is derived from the development community by these investments, we have the authority, we have the right as citizens to be able to say how we want our community to be impacted, what legacy we want to leave in our communities for our children and grandchildren. And so when the community consultations happen, we want to make sure that there is a deep conversation that's happening in the community. Make sure that people who are Black and racialized, people who's been historically removed from these kind of conversations, that there's an intentional effort that is being made to make sure that they're being deeply consulted, and not just consulted whereby you're throwing terminologies at them and expecting them to be able to understand and effectively make decisions on on how to implement. No. There's an education process. There's, a deep community engagement that's happening. And there is an actual blueprint for how you can intervene. And we're looking at examples from other places that have happened and how it's happened. And, what were some of the practices and good practices that made it work. We build community benefits agreements off of Indigenous practices. So with our Indigenous communities here in Canada, because of the duty to consult, you must, consult with Indigenous communities if you're going to build on Indigenous lands. Community benefits agreements kind of take concepts from that and say, if you're going to build in our local neighborhood, in our local communities, well, you got to consult with the people who live here. It's not, free and empty land that you can come and do whatever it is that you want. So that's the concept, right? That we're trying to build on.
It's like, Rosemary, you're raising like really like deep and complicated concepts, because the idea of land and private ownership of land does come with the expectation that they can do what they want. But then we have this layer on top of that of like this idea of community consultation. And what does that mean? And even the idea of the duty to consult, like there's just, there's a lot, there's so much there, which is not today's conversation. But the thing I've noticed just being in the space, sort of in the shoes, in the skin that I'm in, standing at the front of the room talking about a project, is the consultation is for those of privilege of time and money. My mom would never have had the time to go talk about what her needs were, growing up in suburban Vancouver as a child of immigrants whose mother was, a nurse in the daytime and a worker in long-term care in the nighttime, or what, like that just wasn't a possibility. And so all of a sudden our voice doesn't matter. And so just even our structural systems around these concepts have so many barriers. Forget about like actually activating in the space, but even participating in the space. And so it's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down, but I just wanted to kind of put that 2 cents in, because it's very real when you're the person leading a consultation at the front of the room and you see who you're talking to, or there's feedback coming back about racialized community from non-racialized people. And what do you do with that, right? And how do you deal with that? So
and why I like my POC, Eli, is to have, so there are some of us who are actually now penetrating into these sectors and into these real estate workplaces, and our voice doesn't get activated, and we're ignored. And so that kind of a mentorship in the space, I think what you're doing is brilliant. Eli, we need to have more of those kind of spaces within the sector to be able to share our experiences and to also help each other across silos. So while I'm out there in community trying to do my work, guess what? I was able to find a good person like Salima as part of Creatio at the time, who was interested in hearing what we had to say, who wanted to try to understand, how we can collaborate together and help us to navigate the systems internally within, her workplace, and kind of bring to bear the kind of, the privilege that she now holds as a part of a person inside of that system. anyways, yeah.
And I sort of, oh, sorry, Kofi.
Well, Rosemary, just quickly wanted to ask you on that because you were talking about MIPOC, and maybe if you could talk about, because I think you're doing parallel work around the work you're doing with Black contractors in the building trade. So maybe tell us a little bit about that, which is another way where we're building those bonds between kind of racialized professionals in this space.
Yeah, well, with the Eglinton Crosstown project, our first community benefits initiative, that we were able to get an agreement with Metrolinx. We're implementing. We've demanded 10% for employment. We're demanding for social procurement. But then we had the developers or the general contractors going to the Government of Canada committee when they're now being asked to be held accountable to those social procurement goals, basically saying, well, we tried. And we couldn't find those Black contractors. And so we weren't able to kind of fulfill the obligations there. And for us, that was really frustrating because in our work in community, we were seeing Black contractors. So for us, it was really important that we figured out how do we, okay, let's remove this barrier. Let's figure out how we can bring our Black contractors together and allow them to be able to organize themselves and to provide that kind of, to be able to intervene in these processes. So yeah, and similar to the work that you're doing, Eli, it's just so important that we're able to come together and uplift each other in these spaces that are so uncompromising.
Yeah, and I sort of wanted to touch on some of the points that were just mentioned. Like a thing I like to say is that when people ask, like, why is it so important to have racialized voices in our industry? And I think not only are we like fully equipped to do the work, but on top of that, like we can point out a lot of the ethical flaws that often get overlooked because our experiences are missing from the conversation. For example, if we're talking about public engagement, which is like what I do in my day-to-day at the city and parks, it's for example, when we have those public consultation meetings, something that we do and something that I've sort of like push for, and I learned this from when I used to work for Jay Pitters, is paying folks for those public consultations, for example. And that's a foreign concept to a lot of people even today, and why it's important to pay for transportation or childcare coverage as well. Taking this step forward there, or having sort of Black advisory group when you should introduce Black advisory groups into the putting together the designs for certain parks or developments and stuff like that. So like that kind of thinking like really does stem from those who had the lived experience in those areas, and we have those lived experience here.
Yeah. It's just making me think that like, there's this process that, on one end, there's, how do people get involved in real estate development through being part of a consultation or engagement or something meaningful, hopefully, in their community. And then there's folks who want to like own the means of production, right, and actually be developing themselves. And the issue I think we have right now is there is no choice but to sort of, as for a lot of racialized folks, but to land sort of in the, well, I better show up and inform the consultation because owning the means of production is kind of out of bounds for me. And so I think part of what we're trying to get to is like, we want people to have a choice of where they live on the continuum, and not to oversimplify it, looking at Salima, who knows, 10 million times more things about the development industry than me. But I think one of the things we're trying to sort of build here is give people, to Rosemary and Eli's point, the capacity and skills to understand what they're speaking to wherever they live on that continuum, so that they are informed wherever they're showing up, whether they're owning the means of production or they're showing up at an engagement, they can meaningfully engage. And so I guess maybe I want to go to sort of how the industry is changing, because you folks are really beacons in your respective and collective ways. But I did just want to pause because we are, here with our partners at the Future Skills Center, and each of you has spoken about sort of this capacity building and education, and also, and I'm seeing some questions coming in around that as well. And so I just wanted to pause and say, when you think about, there's the technical skills in real estate development, of course, and all the sort of professional services that go into that. But when you think about some of the skills around the sort of technical and professional skills that are required to succeed in this industry, like what sort of comes to mind? Eli, maybe you've heard through the MIPOC network sort of themes around what people really need to know to be successful.
Yeah, I think I can maybe speak to the planners in our network. Sort of like, I guess the number one thing that we hear a lot of is we learn a lot in planning school, like just when it comes to like the basic technical skills you'll need. And, it's constantly, folks will talk about, you work on development applications, or you're going to write a lot of reports, and it's very general, it's very vague. And, the examples that you would use in class can just be sort of like, we're going to work on a planning rationale, and that's the whole semester. But we find when, planning students go into the industry, there's just so much more work that they do on their day-to-day that they didn't actually experience or learn in school. So there's a lot of gaps we noticed within our planning education at many of the universities in Toronto. And so, it's more just like, not just planning rationale, but like writing a housing report or writing different kinds of reports that you don't normally learn. Or, understanding that, you don't really need to know GIS in it, like fully, or you don't really need to know all the different, applications that someone else in another role would normally do, but you're not really told that in school. You weren't really told that in school. And then number one thing as well is how to just navigate office politics, and then also besides office politics, but also how to negotiate even pay and all these basic things that people would think that, oh, someone's going to know that, but in reality, that's not something we necessarily learn in school, and not something that folks think to ask while in school. So it's all these things that they're just sort of surprised with, I guess, in a way, when they enter the industry, and they realize that there's just so much more questions that are unanswered, and now they have to figure out different ways to ask those questions. And I think that's where BIPOC comes in play. And we have those mentors that are just there so they can answer all the many questions that everyone has. And we just also share those questions and answers to the broader network. So hopefully over time, we're building sort of a large Q&A doc that's like 10 pages right now, that we could just get to every single new cohort that we get, to hopefully answer just those initial questions that are just becoming more and more common over time.
Lima Rosemary.
So I agree with Eli, so don't want to get back into that. One thing, I don't know if it's a learning, but maybe a capacity kind of building issue. What we're seeing is that we don't have enough Black and racialized and minority owned businesses in construction. And we know that, the way how the system works, like it or not, is that you hire those people, you hire your family members, your son, your maybe not so much your daughter, but definitely your nephew. And so if we don't have, minority owned contractors, Black owned contractors, women owned contractors who can themselves turn around to apprentice the next generation, and to kind of help them to get into their industry, whether it be through learning a trade or giving them those essential skills that you're never going to get in a workplace in terms of, leadership and supervision and, going out there and managing money and estimating and all of these kinds of things. You just won't get those experiences in the current workplaces, because that level of trust and relationship, they don't see themselves in you. And so you'll continuously be at, the entry level without any kind of operation for opportunities for laddering and leadership and growth within the company. So you need those minority-owned contractors to start their businesses. And so they're going to need entrepreneurial skills. They're going to need to learn how to structure a business, how to incorporate, how to pay their Canada Revenue, agency, their taxes, how to do payroll, and to actually, to run successful businesses. You're not just gonna just kind of intuitively kind of develop that. You need that kind of capacity building and knowledge transfer intentionally that is gonna happen. And, also just in doing that, you're able to kind of build trust in yourself as a business owner, because you understand, maybe the legalese, you can actually start, contracts. Maybe you can look at a joint contract with another Black contractor or minority-owned contractor to take on larger projects, right? We need to look at alternative ownership models as well in our community for not just for businesses, but also for ownership of real estate.
From my perspective, maybe two notes. The first, really simple, anyone can do it. if they're trying to get squarely into being the developer, there's in Canada, an industry newsletter called RENX, RENX.ca. It's just a news serve of everything real estate going on that day. And in the industry, it's really important to understand what's happening around you, because, which leads to kind of the second point, the consequence of mistakes in real estate can range from the thousands to hundreds of thousands, but more likely millions of dollars if a bad decision or wrong decision's made. And when you're learning, and like this is the barrier to entry that, you know, Kofi, you're talking about in the research that you and Zara did, is that's why those barriers to entry are so high. That is one of the reasons that it is family-based, that it is so difficult for people to kind of break in, is because, you know, when you get to that decision-making level, there's a lot on the line. And that's why we are in service to the risk holder, because they're the ones ultimately that hold that consequence. And so how do you mitigate that? You mitigate that by seeing as many examples of all of the things as you can. And reading is a great way to do it in terms of just what's current, and in a way to kind of frame it, or that at least I sort of kind of ultra simplify all of the aspects. It's either financial, it's regulatory, it's in the zoning space, or it's a market-based issue, or a combination of them all. And sort of seeing as much around the finances, understanding what interest rates mean for real estate, understanding what a pro forma is, exposing yourself to what those decision points in the pro forma, how they show up in construction, how they show up in zoning, like how are they connected to each other, thinking about zoning applications, reading Urban Toronto, if you're in the GTA, about what lessons, how when a zoning application evolves over a process, and understanding what the rationale is and how that translates. And then just really following the market. Like we're in a historical market low. What does that mean for real estate development space? What does that mean for opportunity? And so none of this stuff is necessarily rocket science. It's the layering of it that becomes very complicated. And that's, you know, the thing that becomes a barrier. So trying to get yourself squarely into that real estate developer shoes, it's understanding this landscape and then trying to expose yourself as much as you can to all of those aspects, even outside of a formal role in the industry.
You know, this is just, I have a million other questions. I'm also aware that our audience has a million other questions. So I'll just say one thing very quickly, which is, you know, I think that's the thing that's so complex too about this industry as well, where, you know, Rosemary, you know, when I was listening to you earlier, you were talking about like, you know, consultation and engagement, the skill of talking to people, talking to communities in a way that doesn't, you know, cause any harm, in a way that opens and expands versus sort of narrows and tapers. That's a skill all the way to Salima, what you were talking about, which is getting literate in these sort of technical things that seem sort of beyond your jurisdiction, what you're supposed to be leading, but you have to get literate in all of these things so that you can make great decisions. And so it can be, I can see how it can be extremely daunting. We heard that from the folks that we spoke to for sure. And so I'm going to combine our last two questions because I want to go to the awesome audience questions before we shift and talk about sort of some of our collective, our response to what emerged out of this research. So the last question is, do you see signs of hope that the industry is changing? You know, so what are they? And like, what do you want to see, right? So, you know, are you seeing the industry changing, and what do you want to see more of? Because I did notice in the chat, we do have some folks who work at development organizations who are asking that question, you know, how can we change? So anyone who's feeling compelled can start.
I can jump in and say that we are very interested in seeing the industry change. And so to our own benefit, we've been looking at through our Building Diversity Awards, looking at the industry and seeing who are those unions, who are those general contractors and subcontractors and individuals who are leaders within their spaces that are really, you know, doing their level best to make community benefits happen and to incorporate equity, diversity, and inclusion in their workspaces. And we recognized last year, Daniels as an employer, we recognized Dream Unlimited, who even more aggressive than our 10% that we were able to get with Metrolinx in the early days. They've basically gone out and said they're going to push for 20% of local hiring, and they're including social procurement as a part of their commitments, meaning that they will carve out some of those contract opportunities for Black and racialized contractors and developers and such. So this is great. I do see that that there is change afoot, and we see our unions step, because in Ontario, it's a strong unionized construction industry. So we need our unions to take leadership. And I can say that I see it happening slowly but surely. It's percolating. But yeah, we need to definitely turn the pressure up a little bit more and get it boiling.
Selena, Eli?
I guess I can chime in. I think some changes that I'm seeing is a lot more junior planners, especially at planning firms that are racialized. But I think I would like to see a lot more like senior planners or partners at these existing firms who are racialized, especially Black or Indigenous. I like to see better retention, especially of junior racialized folks in the industry, and hopefully no one else like running away from the industry because of what they're experiencing. And that retention, not relying just on outside sources, but like those firms themselves doing the work to sort of improve their the retention of folks like us. And I think I'm sort of blanking right now, but I think another thing as well is actually, let me hand off to Selena while I get my thoughts together. Yeah.
Okay. Closing thoughts to you, Eli. From my perspective, I do think the industry is changing. I think 15 years ago when I entered the space, I would dare not acknowledge my skin color. And today we're having this conversation very publicly and openly in the industry. And doesn't necessarily come up in my day-to-day job, but I wouldn't be shy to go there. When I was interviewing for the role of CEO at the York University Development Corp, it was a moment to acknowledge that hiring me was hiring someone that looked a little different than the traditional space. And you could see the interview panel sort of just take it in and process it in a room of, the traditional players in real estate. And so I don't know that would have happened 10 or 15 years ago. I also think the other really, really important thing happening in Canada is this growth, the growth of our market, our real estate markets, the urbanization of our cities, the growth of our cities creates the problem, but it also creates the opportunity. And I think when that opportunity comes, it comes in so many forms for us to actually capitalize and grow and build off of. And I think that's sort of what's starting to happen in Toronto that I'm so excited about. And I think the other thing for me would be, before handing it back to Eli, is just the idea of power and like, where do we hold power? How do people like Rosemary and I find each other, compile our power so that it's collective and stronger than the forces that we're working against? How do we partner with each other so that now we have collective lessons of what mistakes not to make so that we don't go there, and work with each other so that we don't have to collect all those experiences individually. And that's something that the really sophisticated players do in real estate. And so we as racialized people need to do it for ourselves too, if we want to see progress.
Eli?
And yeah, I just have 3 last points. And I think, we see a lot, or not a lot, but we see, smaller firms like led by Indigenous and Black folk, for example, that are up and coming. And I think one thing I would love to see is just, the growth and the success of these firms over time. We have Indigenous design processes as well. I would love to see, especially for specifically engaging for certain projects, Black communities, especially like the St. Lawrence area because of the historical significance there, like having a Black design process. What does that look like, right? And engaging the proper folks to develop that over time. And finally, just being a more openness to different ways of living. We build communities when we have conflict development in certain areas, being open to the existing ethnic enclaves that exist there, and what people need, and hearing people out and not just assuming what people will want living there. So yeah, it's more openness to that for sure.
Well, Eli, you grounded us in sort of the why, which I feel very grateful for, which is, what you're speaking to is culturally responsive cities that can look, as pluralistic as, a city like Toronto is. And I think that's when we're talking about the urgency and the imperative, is that we want to start seeing cities that respond to more bespoke community needs. And it's possible, right? I think it is possible. I know it's possible, actually. And so I'm going to try and mush together a few questions because there's so many great ones. But I think there's one really awesome one that sort of applies to all of you from Jem Roberts. It's really looking at or asking the question, for individuals entering the industry, what do you see as the best opportunities for people looking to support BIPOC folks in real estate development? So, if you are a non-racialized person and there's, racialized folks, in your community, in your organization around you, what can these folks who might identify as allies, what can they do to support racialized folks who want to step into this space?
Eli, I'm just going to leave it to you to talk about the importance of mentoring. I mean, hands down, this is what we found. That's why we implemented too our Next Gen Builders mentoring program. We know that we don't have a lot of bodies within these, systems and spaces, but there are good people that we have been able to connect with who have become allies and who want to see Black youth succeed, who wants to see women succeed, and who are willing to themselves individually. I'm not even just talking about the organization, like the union or the employer. Just there are good individuals within these spaces that actually wants to see, minorities or, BIPOC people succeed, and will, out of their own, interest and love, will reach out and will want to, give, 3 hours a month to actually have a structured mentoring relationship with someone over a year, and just to help them to guide and navigate through this, complex system. When they have, issues and challenges in the workplace, they have a sounding board. If they're looking at, leadership opportunities, we'll give them the space and the encouragement to be able to take those leaps, to stretch themselves, to be able to do more. So for me, mentorship is absolutely key. And it could be individuals can support this, the unions can support this, the employer or the construction company can support this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's share your networks, be generous with the people that you know, co-sign, put your name, put your social capital against someone else.
Love it. And Eli, our final response?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with the both of you. And I don't want to sound too much for a broken record, but absolutely, like, again, mentorship is just so important. And I love that Salima brought up co-signing as well, because I guess one experience I had when I was doing my master's is when I was, having a research, and I was researching like queer spaces and, what queer space making looks like, and, this whole new thing. And I'm like, no one really knows about this, but I love it. But when I was working at Jay at the time, and she saw this research, she used her own network to get my article out on spacing, right? And I would never have went on spacing if I didn't, have Jay, put her network out there and put her resources sort of on the table and help me sort of get my passion work out there for folks to read. So it's so important. Like, there's mentoring, there's co-signing, sharing your network, and we could talk about sort of financial support, but that's sort of another sort of conversation. But like, if we're talking about non-financial support, like, those three areas are pretty big, and you can go pretty far in supporting someone just by focusing your sort of efforts there.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of you. Speaking of generosity, thank you for sort of sharing all of your wisdom, supporting us through this research. You folks have been involved in a variety of different ways. and for all that you're doing to advance equitable and thriving civic life for all. If you haven't already, if you are listening in and you don't know these three people, like have tabs open, Google all of them. They're doing amazing things. They'll continue to do amazing things. But really, thanks for the time and energy and candor today in our conversation. Selena, I think I'm going to pass it to you now.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. This has been such a hopeful panel discussion. I've been so invigorated just listening in on all of your perspectives from urban planning and development and community benefits and community organizing. And thank you for bringing your whole selves into this conversation as well and sharing some personal stories as well. The many challenges raised in this research, if you're a racialized person, they feel so unfortunately familiar. But what I love about the direction of this conversation and the direction of your work and the direction of our work together is how we harness that sinking feeling. And in Salima's words, harness our power together and co-sign and come together to think about, real estate is such a crucial part of the Canadian economy. And real estate is for everyone, and therefore it has to include everyone, especially at the decision-making levels, especially at the executive levels, and especially in every adjacent profession, whether that's architecture and planning, engineering, design, construction, and so forth. We are so thrilled to be partnering with Monumental in the next steps around this work. And so I want to pass it back over to Zara to tell you a little bit about future builds, but thank you to the speakers today for coming to the collective table. Thank you for our audience. I know we didn't hear from lots of voices who are in the room, but you're all doing amazing things as well. And let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep thinking about how we can take action together and contribute from all of our corners. Zara, back over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I will only take a few more minutes, but it's an exciting announcement, so I encourage you to stick around. So as Kofi mentioned, emerging from our research, one of the things, that we heard was that people need access to the capacity, to the knowledge, to the networks, to, pathways to capital, to be able to participate in this industry. And so Monumental, supported by the Future Skills Center and in partnership with the University of Toronto's Infrastructure Institute, is really excited to be launching our Future Builds BIPOC Real Estate Development Incubator. Applications open for this incubator next Monday, February 10th. And what the program is a 5-month immersive program designed for mid-career professionals, so folks with some professional experience. It does not have to be in real estate development. It can be in sort of any industry, adjacent industries, for mid-career professionals to sort of begin to build some of the foundational knowledge, get access to the networks, get access to pathways to capital, to start careers in real estate development and specifically entrepreneurial endeavors. Folks going through this program, our hope is that people applying to this program have an interest in building sort of at the start, at the scale of sort of 2 to 4 unit developments to really understand how this process works and be able to take those risks in a way that is supported by a cohort of participants doing the same thing. There is more information on this website, which I believe our FSC team is going to post in the chat. Applications will launch February 10th. You'll see all the information you need on our Future Builds website. We're really excited to bring this immersive program to you. It will run from May to September of 2023. We'll have a cohort of about 20 to 25 folks. So we're really, really excited to be launching this program with such amazing partners, and really to start to speak into the challenges collectively with all the folks on the panel today, as we start to sort of continue to push the industry forward, start to turn up the percolation to a boil, as Rosemary was saying earlier. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Make sure to check out our website. And if you want to really go deep on the report, it's available on the FSC website, Mapping Racialized Experiences in the Real Estate Development Industry. So some good weekend reading, evening reading. And thanks again for showing up and all the questions and all the great energy in the chat. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.